Welcome to the Not Supposed to Know podcast. This space has been created by artists Billie and Rob White from the hilly heart of mid Wales. As artists, we both have an interest in the two related concepts of the unknown and the metaphysical, and how we can creatively access these spaces beyond everyday experience and understanding. We'd love to have conversations with as many like-minded creatives and other interesting folk about how the unknown, or what we are not supposed to know, impacts how they work. To kick off our very first podcast, I'd like to thank the artist Pauline Woolley for joining us. Pauline is a long-term friend, and I'm biased, but she's also an amazing artist. She's based in the UK, and her practice deals with her relationship to the sky, time, place, and astronomy. Pauline has been shortlisted for the Investment Insight Astronomy Photographer of the Year 2021, and her work Solar Tree won the Astronomy Photographer of the Year 2022 Annie Maunder Prize for Image Innovation. Gosh, that was a mouthful. This is a prime example of how extensive research alongside creative risk-taking can lead to uncharted territory and breakthroughs in artistic creation. Exactly what we love talking about. Pauline gets stuck into some very exciting subject matter as well, like Mars and its canals, visiting Iceland and its intense terrain, plus a visit to the dark matter lab deep under the North Sea, and much, much more. So without further ado, here's the first of, I hope, many conversations with Pauline. This is the first of hopefully many podcasts where the You're Not Supposed to Know team, which comprises of Billie and Rob White, interview very exciting and interesting people, probably mainly artists, but other interesting people as well, practitioners, about the things that you're perhaps not supposed to know, but we somehow, through our practice or our creativity, we somehow chase or tune into or stumble across by accident that stimulates very interesting work or ways of working. So today we have Pauline Woolley with us for our debut podcast. She is an amazing artist and good friend. And I'm just going to read out from her website so that I don't say anything that's not something Pauline would say. But Pauline is an artist based in the UK, in the East Midlands, whose practice deals with her relationship to the sky, time, place, and astronomy, often in an urban or from an urban setting. One of her recent works, Solar Tree, which is a must-see, I have to say, has been selected as the winning image of the Astronomy Photographer of the Year 2022 Annie Maunder Prize for Image Innovation, which is a new category, I believe. She has worked with Dr. Daniel Brown at Nottingham Trent University, who with Writing Skyscapes, which is a collaboration, and he's a national astronomy meet. Oh, I'm now gibbering on now. I've just fluffed that. Pauline, save me. You work with Dr. Daniel Brown doing what?
Doing collaborating and working on his project Writing Skyscapes. So I was involved in that as a single artist, but also as part of the Outsider Collective as well. And then the online exhibition I presented, I think it was 2021 at the National Astronomy meeting online.
Brilliant. So we'll kick off. So that's just a brief intro, but just for people who don't know your work or don't know you as an artist, just to say a little bit about what you do and what you make, perhaps.
So, gosh, where do I start? I'm going to start right at the back at the beginning in terms of I was a painter. I did a degree. I kind of specialised in fine art painting. And then over the course of the last sort of 15 years, I've moved towards the photographic image. So I don't call myself a photographer. I use photography to make images, and I often make images without using a sort of traditional camera. So I do sort of long exposure stuff using darkroom paper that is filled, that is put into the back of maybe a homemade pinhole camera, or a old 1920s folding camera. And then I make long exposures of the sun moving across the sky. But that's just kind of one part of my work, because I use that method. I use all kinds of different methods, and I use digital cameras now, and yeah, a whole kind of.
Do they all fit within the kind of field of photography, your methods, most of them?
Yeah, the photographic methods. But
Yeah.
I would not class myself as a traditional photographer.
So you prefer
I
being
kind of,
called an artist?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And what about the astronomy side of things? Is that is that important to always keep that as part of your descriptor, do you think?
I think definitely at the moment it's still very much a fundamental part of the work that I make. I've always been interested in sort of astro images and sort of truth behind astro images, kind of what we get presented with isn't necessarily what our own eyes can actually see when we look at the night sky. So there's a little bit of a truth element going on.
Some of them get coloured, don't they? And are sort of just made to look more seductive, perhaps. Yeah,
Perhaps,
the
yeah,
general public. Yeah, so that's
yeah.
a really interesting point then, Pauline, that I suppose those two things, photography and astronomy, are two areas where there is this sort of a very much an unknown part of that, isn't there? There's lots and lots of questions, particularly with astronomy, I suppose, and physics and all those things, but also with all of those non-traditional ways of making photographs. There are lots of questions or things left open, perhaps, that aren't within our control. So maybe that idea of those areas where you feel most excited, where there's things happening but you're not in control necessarily. How does that come into your process then?
Well, I suppose it's kind of like two-pronged really. So with the work that I make using sort of pinhole cameras and putting paper in the back of a camera, there's very much element of chance, because it's dependent on what the weather's like, if I've actually composed it properly, all kinds of stuff. But then that's the same with the astro photography. So basically, if I'm doing astro stuff, then I will take a series of exposures over a long period of time that then in post-processing get put together. But within that, there's still an element of chance, because you're leaving your kit out for a long period of time, and clouds can come in, weather can affect it. So there's a whole range of it's not, I can't always control it.
No,
I don't always want to control it.
I suppose it comes back to, I mean, if we take it right back to, we were both painters. So that idea of leaving something and it's almost a game, isn't it? Where you leave something to see what happens, but then it's what's the next move, isn't it? When you come back to it, see what you've got, what do you have to manipulate, change the way you process, perhaps, or where you leave it. All those things are just, it's like a tentative game of exploration, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And that's why I don't think of myself as a photographer, because the image is just the starting point for me. It's not the finished product, if you see what I mean. I don't take the image out and then necessarily that's it. Then that opens up a whole wide range of more experimentation and
I suppose it's those
stuff.
ongoing questioning, isn't it? Rather than striving in science or in those areas, they're striving for quite a focused and a focused question, and after an answer, aren't you? And I think well, for me anyway, and that might be the same for you, Pauline, but it's revealing more questions. That's almost the game, isn't it? Or exciting, not necessarily getting, they always say it's the journey, isn't it? But I mean, I watched recently one of your talks with Dr. Brown. I think people can access it on YouTube, can't they? But it was very interesting. This was to do with your winning work, the Annie Maud Prize work. That it's just amazing. But I think you were talking about how it's, it's a beautiful piece of work, but it's almost all those myriad of things, all those questions that you were after, chasing after, that kind of culminated in the work. I don't know whether you can tell us a bit about that, how that came about.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because it was the first time that I'd ever used what's the word that I'm looking for? So sort of imagery that I'd not actually gathered myself. So it's sort of secondhand.
So is this
material.
using their archive? Is it?
Yeah, so this is using the Solar Dynamic Observatory database, which is fantastic. There's a whole range of, you can log on in real time and see what the sun's activity is doing in different ways. So it's fantastic. And I have to say, I'm not a scientist. I don't understand all of this, but I'm triggered to make work that responds to all of this. So it was really interesting, kind of gathering all that data and bringing it down, and then trying to formulate it into a piece of work that had some link to the physical work that I make. So I think, some people kind of question, well, it's not really astrophotography, is it? It's not this, it's not that, but it's still a manipulated image, and every image that we look at has been manipulated,
or potentially could have been. Yeah.
Potentially could have been, so it's the same as, taking a negative into a dark room. The negative is just the starting point, it's not the finished piece. So so that's an element of it. And then the fact that I've been working with using the sun as a long time vehicle within my work, it was this idea of the sun's solar activity, and then this link between solar activity and tree rings, which is a whole different, scientific area, which again is kind of excited me, and I want to know more about that. How, on physical Earth, we can gain information about what's going on in the solar system through our physical nature here.
Yeah, really interesting. So it's almost like it's processing without us even being aware of it, isn't it? Or it's archiving what's happening out in space without us, without human intervention. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. It is.
So it's a very, very seductive piece, and obviously, I think, woohoo, Pauline got the prize. But again, it's quite important to note that there's not that many. Well, there's more now, isn't there? I think you've got quite there are quite a few supporting artists out there and people working in this field now of sort of astronomy. And I'm talking women artists here. I don't know whether I just said that, but that are working within photography, astronomy, and those sorts of areas that there haven't been. It's not something pushed at. You can do this. So, and I think winning that prize is quite significant as well, because it tends to be a lot of chaps with the big guns astronomy kit, or their little observatories in the garden type thing, as well as lots of people with lots of expensive kit, I imagine. So the fact that this is it's very
it's accessible.
Yes, and the image is very accessible, and the way you produce it has elements of that that it just shows that you can pull all, I mean, that's what's great about being an artist, isn't it? We're allowed to pull on all these things where we don't have to be narrow. We can be creative with the whole process of this not knowing, this questioning. As creative as we like, can't we?
And that's what's really fantastic about this category. And when it was first announced, I think it might have been about 4 years ago, it really sort of piqued my interest, because I wasn't aware that there was all this data available online. There's all these observatories, you can pull Hubble files down, and then you learn the process of how to process them and extract the kind of like the visual information. And I think that's sort of really fantastic, because you've kind of touched on a point in terms of astronomy and women. There's lots of places that I'd love to go and rock up for a few days and just spend a period of time in the landscape. But as a woman, and as a woman, if I was going to do that alone, I don't think I would necessarily feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I think
so that's another kind of conversation you could kind of get into. So if this is a way of introducing women or people that don't have access to expensive kit or the technical knowledge, I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, because it just allows a different viewpoint as well, doesn't it? It means people might see it as a negative, that but accessibility means that we get to see lots of different viewpoints, which is again just opens lots of different types of questioning, doesn't it? Those different viewpoints, which is really interesting. So Rob brought down a little question that he wanted to add in there. So he's been reading some work by a chap called Norman Fisher, and it talks a lot about language. And on the one hand, our language and what we learn from childhood can be a bit of a prison. We're stuck in the confines of that. Or if you go through educational systems, we learn certain things, again with sciences or math, in our specialisms, say, we are locked inside that language. And art school is the same, isn't it, in a way?
Completely.
It can be very trapping in the way that language is used, and the way that we're supposed or define, the way that we're supposed to behave or produce work, or all those things. But it also, on the other hand, language can also free us. So it can open our imagination. And I'm talking about language in the sense of creative languages now, not literal language, but it can open our imaginations and allow us to reach out into the world, kind of fly beyond it. And if we use poets as an example, that's what they try to do. And I suppose the try is the key bit, isn't it? Like, we're not supposed to know, we're trying, but if we think of it always as a fail, in a way, if we succeeded, there'd be no point making more work, would there? The failure is not a bad thing. Artists are very good at failing. I am.
Every day, but it's not talked about.
No, and and the fact that that's heart-wrenching, because as a creative, I think you really, poets, art, musicians, dancers, we all really put ourselves personally, I think, or a lot of people put themselves out there. It's a little bit a part of you, and if you think every time that you give it out to the world and it's deemed a failure, or you feel it, we forget that failure is all the point, in a way, and it's the stimulus. But anyway, so Norman Fisher was saying, but the point is, it's not to succeed but to make the attempt, which seems to make sense. I know you sent me something the other day which was very much about that, wasn't it? It was and I talked to somebody this morning who's putting an exhibition together, and it was very much, you don't have to put out everything. You don't have to show everybody the steps, like your final piece, Pauline, of that prize winning work is. But we feel like we have to explain ourselves now, the step, justify the steps to it, but maybe, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that work particularly, it's important to know about those things because it's very interesting, or maybe it is to certain people. But not always.
No, I think we've come to a point where we kind of overshare, I think, in terms of, and that's down to sort of social media, isn't it? But I think it's like we're not allowed to fail. It's like we always have to present our best selves all the time. And it's like, well, I'd like to go into people's studios and look in their bins or look in their recycling bin on their computer and see everything that they've got rid of and discarded. Because sometimes it feels like when you start something, for me, it's like some kind of toxic vomiting session where you just have to get things, you just have to purge and get things out before you can then move on to something else. I think with some work, it is important to understand how things are constructed. Like, you're talking about kind of solar tree, because that's a big part of it. It's not just a visual piece, it's a visual piece that's connected to an area of science. But it's like there's the photographer Adam Fuss, who he works a lot with cameraless images, and there's an interview online where basically he turns around and says, why are you asking me my technique? Why are you asking me what paper? Do you ask a painter this? Do you ask them exactly what cadmium yellow they're using? Do you ask a musician, why have you chosen the note of E for that? And I think as visual artists, we bear the brunt of quite a lot of a beating stick sometimes.
It's almost just for it's being dissected.
Yeah,
maybe
which you don't get in a lot of other artistic practices.
No, you wouldn't ask a poet what construction techniques they used to form their poem, or whether they did it on the toilet or going for a walk. Well, maybe. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, it's really interesting. The other side to that is that it creates a lot of interesting stuff. Like, I could see your work, that sometimes the actual process might be almost a performance in itself. The landscape, the sun, the elements, the material. But it should be our choice, isn't it? I think is the day, not that we feel like we're sometimes having to slot all these things in. That we've got to show a bit of that, we've got to show a bit of this. We have to justify, this, that, and the other. I think probably. Anyway, we've gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, but what's happening for you next, Pauline? What have you got happening in the future? Or what are you working on at the moment? What are you looking at? What are you interested in?
So I kind of feel like I'm in one of these sort of fallow periods where I need to slow down. I'm very much, I can go very sort of head first, very fast, making loads and loads of stuff, and then I kind of like hit a bit of a brick wall, and then I have to go, hang on a minute, what is it that I'm doing? What is it I'm concentrating on? Because also I think I get distracted by researching too much stuff and looking at too much stuff. So at the moment I'm kind of like catching my breath and breathing. But I'm trying to, I want to apply for some funding, because there's places and people that I want to visit that would help inform sort of like the next step and the next stage of my work. And I've kind of gone back to making small little books as well, just putting images in, just random images that I've made as a way of looking at things.
I was going to say, what are your processes for kind of for doing that, when you kind of stop the making, so I suppose is the thing, even though the books are making still, it's almost like, probably, is it like curating, is it a way of just sorting things out, is it,
It's a way of sorting things. Yeah, it's a way of sorting things out, but it's a way of physically making things, because I get really, like, I have to, because with photography it's the 2D image on a surface, and sometimes I feel like I want to make it more of a physical object. So I'm never satisfied until something I can kind of hold it in my hands. So I mean, obviously this is a sound podcast, but I make kind of little kind of concertina books where I'm kind of showing Billy this at the moment. It's got some of my images on. And what I probably will do is then carry that around with me for a while and just get it out now and again and just look at it and try and work things out.
You make these very beautiful small folded books that work really well at bringing some of your imagery together and almost help. I know for me, looking at them, it makes sense when you kind of curate your work like that.
And kind of looking at different ways of displaying work as well, because that's the other thing. And I think I struggle a bit with, having come from painting, so the painted piece on a stretch canvas goes on the wall. I kind of want to get away from that a bit and have something that is more of a physical thing, or almost like a talisman that you could kind of carry around, or something that isn't necessarily
gallery wall.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, something that you necessarily.
It's interesting, isn't it? We're in a time where there's a shift between, the gallery and what where is the gallery now? There are all so many alternatives to that, aren't there? So I think that's. Yeah. I know you've dabbled with. You've made some very beautiful. I shouldn't say dabbled, because you've made some very beautiful sort of animated film works as well. Because obviously there's quite a lot of movement in your process. The capturing of the sun. The sun's obviously moving. The moon's moving. All those things that are in the sky. We're moving on. So there's a lot of movement that obviously you feel needs to be tangible. I mean, I suppose the books are like making it tangible, aren't they? The intangible tangible. So yeah. Does the film do that as well, do you think, when you've had the...
Yeah, it does. It kind of satisfies another physical making of something. So even though it's a film and you may be watching it on the screen, I feel like I'm still kind of curating and putting images together, and there's movement, and I can either shorten the length of time or expand the length of time, and I quite like that. But I also like having that with a physical print or a piece of work to go with it as well. So it's kind of stepping out of comfort zone, really, with that kind of work.
I definitely get that, because it's just another whole realm, isn't it? There's another, because we kind of get into our processes that we get comfortable with, perhaps, and we sort of, and that's part of it, isn't it? It's kind of playing with a process until you feel like you've kind of mastered it, but you still don't know what you're getting. But then you kind of sometimes need to step into a completely different sort of process, because the learning. So that's the question, is how important is the learning, not knowing, as in, we have to learn something new to stimulate. Is that important to your practice as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's been there all the time. I guess that stems from the fact that, my full-time job is a technician in a college. So up until 2 years ago, I was looking after a darkroom. And I kind of went in not knowing anything about the darkroom, so I had to learn, and I had to learn quite quick. But from that, I learned an amazing amount of information and about processes and historic processes. And that stayed with me. So whether it's a physical analog process or whether it's a digital process, I still really enjoy learning about different technical skills that I can then put into the work.
Yeah, so I don't think we'll ever have an issue with sort of lifelong learning, because that's always the next question kind of opens up at, oh gosh, I must find out how you do that, or how I can make that happen, which is, yeah, it's another joy of it, I suppose, isn't it? Because it's
Yeah.
So and you have a show in Rome at the moment.
I've got a piece of work in Rome at the moment
Right.
with Lucent Art. So it was an open call to do with nightscapes and astro imaging. So I think that's on for for a few weeks, I think.
All right. And
So that's
who's it
quite
with?
exciting.
Who's overseeing that?
It's a company called, or it's a creative company called Lucent Art. So lucentart.com. So they're on Instagram and
Right. Well, I'll try and put all the links to things. So we're running out of time now, Pauline. So I will just finally, where can people see your amazing work?
so you can find me on www.paulinewoolley.co.uk, and then if you then go to that page and then scroll down, you'll be able to see my Instagram link. I'm on Instagram as well.
And I think you're definitely someone to watch, because there seems to be lots of exciting things happening. And it's just, I think, the work you've been making is just so exciting. And again, that stepping in, I've been on a few sort of visits with you to some of the to like the Sherwood Observatory and those spaces, and I know you've been down. What was the mining a while
Oh
back?
yeah, that was in 2013. I went down the Bowlby potash mine in Cleveland, which is also home to the dark matter laboratory, which I have to say was a real starting point in this sort of my period of creativity over the sort of the last 10 years. That was, yeah, an experience that sort of changed my creative
It's really
path, really.
interesting, isn't it? The idea that your practice in a way is about looking up,
But
but then to be able to find out the deep, meaningful mysteries of the universe, we have to go deep, deep down.
yeah,
It's interesting,
yeah,
isn't it? That we're looking outwards as artists, but actually, it's like your time now, like you say, when we sort of compost, we have to go right back in again and
yeah.
see what it is that stimulates us. And we haven't touched on things like, I know we've got a shared thing about grief and loss and sort of personal histories, but that would be quite nice to perhaps talk about that at a future time and see what you're
Yeah,
doing. So
yeah.
be lovely to have you on again, Pauline, and
Thank you, Billy. It's been lovely talking to you.
it's amazing. So yes, thank you very much. I will put all Pauline's links, and keep your eye out, and obviously go and have a look at the stuff in Rome and the astronomy of the year photography awards. Are they still on down in?
Yes, it's still down on the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, and it's on until the beginning of August, I think. So you've got a few months left to just go and look at it, and it's an amazing exhibition. There's just lots of really interesting imagery
I'm
from
sure you
around
can
the world.
access that online as well. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'll put the links to those things. So brilliant. Thank you very much, Pauline. So lovely to
thank
speak to
you.
you. Cheers.
All
Bye.
right, thank you, Billy.
Bye.
Oh, no.